If you love gripping stories that pull you in and don't let go, you're in the right place. This is Mr. Gray Stories. Kendra's fingers trembled slightly as she held the newborn close to her chest, her eyes fixed on the tiny face resting against her. "This wasn't supposed to be my life," she whispered, her voice barely above breath. The room was quiet, but not peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes when everything has already changed, and there's no going back. A doctor stepped forward, clipboard in hand, breaking the moment. "The father needs to sign the documents." Kendra didn't respond immediately. Her grip tightened just a little, because this wasn't just paperwork. This was confirmation, responsibility, reality. And the one person tied to all of it was the one man she never planned to see again. Before she could gather her thoughts, the door opened. Not slowly, not dramatically, just enough to shift the air in the room. Blake walked in, calm, composed, unshaken in a way that made everything feel even more intense. He didn't rush toward her, didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, at the child, at the moment they now shared whether they were ready or not. Kendra's eyes met his, and there it was, everything they hadn't said finally catching up to them. Her voice came out steady, but not without weight. "You said you didn't want anything from me." Blake didn't look away. "I didn't," she continued, her voice softer now, more honest. "Until it stopped being just about me." A brief silence followed, not empty, full of decisions, full of consequences, full of something neither of them could ignore anymore. Welcome to Mr. Gray Stories. Here, we tell the kind of stories that stay with you, stories that challenge you, comfort you, and sometimes even change you. If you're new, go ahead and subscribe. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Have you ever done everything right, made the careful choices, avoided the situations that lead to regret, only to still find yourself standing in the middle of something you never planned for? Not because you were careless, not because you didn't think things through, but because life doesn't always ask for permission before it changes direction. What happens when one decision, one moment, one night, rewrites everything you thought your life would be? Before we get into this story, go ahead and like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe, because stories like this, they don't just entertain you, they stay with you, they make you think, and sometimes they make you see things differently. Because this story didn't start in a hospital. It didn't start with a child. It didn't even start with love. It started in Richmond, with a woman who had everything under control. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been so disciplined with your life that people started to think you had it all figured out? The kind of person who plans ahead, who doesn't move blindly, who watches others make mistakes and quietly tells themselves, "That won't be me." Because you've seen what happens when people rush into things. You've seen what happens when emotions take control. You've seen people lose themselves trying to hold on to something that was never stable to begin with. So, you made a decision. A quiet one, not announced, not explained, just lived. You told yourself, "I will be different." You chose patience over pressure, clarity over confusion, control over chaos. And for a while, it worked. Your life made sense. Everything stayed where it belonged. No unnecessary complications, no emotional mess, no unexpected turns, just structure, just peace, just certainty. But here's the part no one really talks about. What happens when life doesn't follow the rules you set for it? What happens when you do everything right and still end up in a situation you never prepared for? Not because you failed, not because you lacked discipline, but because one moment, just one, didn't go according to plan. And now, you're standing in the middle of a reality you can't ignore. A reality that doesn't care how careful you were. A reality that forces you to ask questions you never thought you'd have to answer. Questions like, how did I get here? What do I do now? Can I handle this? And the hardest one of all, is this a mistake? Or is this something I'm supposed to face? Because sometimes, what looks like everything falling apart is actually everything shifting into place in a way you didn't expect. And that's where this story really pulls you in. Not because it's perfect, not because it's easy, but because it's real. So before we go any further, take a second. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. I want to know where you're watching from. And if you're the kind of person who appreciates stories that make you feel something deeper than just entertainment, go ahead and subscribe, because this is one of those stories you don't just watch, you experience. Richmond moved with a rhythm that didn't need to be announced. You could hear it early in the morning, not in noise but in motion. Cars easing through familiar streets, neighbors calling out to each other without needing to step off their porches. Music drifting lightly from somewhere down the block, blending into the day like it had always belonged there. And right in the middle of that rhythm was Kendra. Her mornings didn't start with confusion or delay. They started with intention. Alarm at 5:45. No snooze. By 6 she was already moving, not rushed, not dragging, just steady. Coffee brewed the same way every day. No guessing. No switching things up just for the sake of it. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, screen lit with a clean schedule she had already reviewed the night before. Every hour had a purpose. Every task had its place. Because to Kendra, order wasn't just a habit. It was protection. By 7:30 she was out the door, dressed sharp but simple. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just enough to say she took herself seriously. Downtown Richmond greeted her the same way it always did. Busy, efficient, predictable. Exactly how she liked it. At the clinic, she didn't waste time easing into the day. "Kendra, we've got a scheduling conflict in room 3, a voice called out before she even sat down. She didn't look stressed. Didn't sigh. She just nodded slightly. "Move the 10:30 to 11:15 and shift Dr. Collins forward. That clears it." The response came quickly. "Got it." That was her reputation. Not loud, not dramatic. Just reliable. The kind of person people trusted when things needed to be handled properly. But that didn't start here. It started years ago, back on the East Side, where life wasn't always structured, but it was always observed. Cookouts filled entire weekends, not invitations, expectations. If music was playing, you showed up. If food was ready, you ate. And if something happened, everybody knew. Not because people were nosy, because community meant involvement. And growing up in that kind of environment taught Kendra something early. Choices don't just affect you. They echo. She saw it in small ways first. A neighbor arguing outside when things didn't work out. A cousin sitting quietly at family gatherings after trusting someone who didn't stay. A friend who stopped showing up altogether after giving too much of herself to the wrong situation. Nobody needed to explain it to her. She understood. So, she made a decision. Not out loud, not for attention. Just within herself. I won't lose control of my life. And over time, that decision shaped everything. Especially when it came to relationships. She didn't rush. Didn't get pulled in by attention. Didn't confuse connection with permanence. And most importantly, she didn't give herself away easily. Not because she didn't feel things, but because she valued what those feelings meant. "Girl, be honest with me." Her friend leaned forward slightly across the brunch table, raising an eyebrow. "This whole waiting thing, how serious are you about it?" Kendra didn't react immediately. She took a calm sip of her drink before answering. "I'm serious enough to not regret anything later." Her friend laughed, shaking her head. "Okay, but at this point, you're not waiting. You're preserving history." Kendra smiled, just a little. "I'm just not interested in making decisions I have to recover from." "That sounds good in theory," her friend replied, "but life doesn't always give you perfect timing." Kendra leaned back slightly. "I'm not looking for perfect timing," she said. "I'm looking for the right decision." The conversation moved on, but her words didn't, because even as she said them, there was a quiet question sitting in the back of her mind. Not loud, not distracting, just present. Was she truly in control? Or was she avoiding something she didn't fully understand? Later that evening, her phone buzzed. A reminder. "Call Auntie, 7 p.m. She smiled slightly, picking it up without hesitation. "Hey, baby," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Hey, Auntie, you eating properly?" Kendra shook her head, smiling. "Yes. You working too much?" "No. You staying out of trouble?" That made her pause, just for a second. Then she answered, "Always." And in that moment, she believed it. Because up until now, her life had followed the plan. Nothing unexpected. Nothing complicated. Nothing she couldn't handle. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. She just didn't know yet that all it would take was one night, miles away from Kendra's structured routine in Richmond. Blake's world didn't run on schedules. It ran on instinct. The morning didn't start with alarms. It started with movement, boots hitting the ground before the sun fully settled into the sky. The ranch stretched wide, open, and unapologetically real, land that didn't adjust itself for comfort, only for effort. Blake stepped out of the house, already dressed for the day. Worn denim, dust-lined boots, a simple shirt with sleeves pushed back just enough to show he wasn't here for appearances. He didn't check a schedule, didn't scroll through reminders. He looked out across the land instead, measured things with his eyes, adjusted based on what needed attention. Because out here, you didn't control everything, you responded to it. A phone buzzed in his hand. Business never stayed too far away. He answered without hesitation. Yeah. A voice came through, polished and direct. We need confirmation on the expansion deal before noon. Blake leaned against a wooden fence, eyes still on the land in front of him. You'll have it, he said simply. No extra words, no drawn-out discussion, just certainty. That was how he handled everything. Quiet authority, no need to prove it. To most people, Blake didn't fit the image. CEO, investor, owner of multiple agricultural operations across Virginia. But if you saw him out here, you wouldn't assume any of that. And that's exactly how he preferred it. He didn't care about titles, didn't care about recognition. What mattered to him was simple. Work that produced results, decisions that made sense, a life that didn't feel forced. But not everything in his world followed that simplicity. Some things came with expectation. And expectation didn't ask for permission. Later that week, Blake found himself somewhere he didn't enjoy. A family gathering. Formal. Controlled. Every detail in place. The kind of environment where conversations were measured and nothing was ever said without intention behind it. He sat at the long table, posture relaxed but presence steady. Across from him, eyes watched. Not aggressively, not openly, but carefully. Because in this room, Blake wasn't just a man. He was a continuation, a name, a future that needed direction. You've done well for yourself. The voice came smoothly, almost casually. Blake looked up. I've done what needed to be done. A small nod followed. Acknowledgement, but not satisfaction. Because that wasn't the real topic. Not yet. Another voice joined in. And the business is stable. Blake didn't respond this time. He already knew where this was going. He had heard it before. Just in different ways, different settings. Same question underneath it all. It came directly this time. No soft delivery, no disguise. What are you leaving behind? The table went quiet. Not tense. Just focused. Blake leaned back slightly, his expression unchanged. What I've built, that's not what I meant, the voice replied calmly. Of course it wasn't. They weren't talking about land, or money, or success. They were talking about something else. Something that couldn't be managed with business decisions. A legacy isn't just property, the voice continued. It's continuation. Blake's jaw tightened just slightly. Not out of anger, out of awareness. Because he understood the weight behind that word. Continuation, marriage, a child, an heir, not optional in their eyes, necessary. I'm not rushing into anything, Blake said finally. His tone wasn't defensive, just firm, controlled. But it didn't close the conversation, it only redirected it. You're not getting younger. There it was, blunt, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. Blake didn't argue. Didn't push back. He just sat there for a moment, letting the words settle. Because the truth was, this wasn't pressure he could dismiss. It followed him. Quietly, consistently, even when he was alone. Later that night, back at the ranch, everything felt different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because the conversation stayed with him. He walked along the fence line, hands resting loosely against the wood as he looked out into the distance. For someone who had built so much, there was still something unfinished, not in business, not in success, but in direction. He wasn't avoiding relationships. He just didn't move without certainty, didn't commit to something that didn't feel right, didn't play roles just to meet expectations. Because to him, that kind of decision came with consequences. And Blake didn't believe in stepping into something halfway. Still, The question remained, not from them, from himself. What was he actually building toward, and who was he building it for? The wind moved lightly across the land, steady and uninterrupted. Blake stood there, unmoving, grounded, certain in most areas of his life, but not all. Because for the first time in a long time, there was something he didn't have an answer for, and without realizing it, that answer was already on its way to him. The invitation had been sitting in Kendra's email for 3 days. Unread at first, then opened, then ignored again. A charity event in downtown Richmond. Formal, crowded, everything she usually avoided unless there was a clear reason to attend. Kendra, you need to be there. Her coworker didn't ask. She insisted. It's good for visibility. Connections matter. Kendra leaned back in her chair, arms crossed slightly. I already have a job, and you want to keep growing, right? Her coworker replied quickly. Because staying comfortable doesn't move you forward. That landed, not heavily, but enough. That evening, Kendra stood in front of her mirror longer than usual, not because she didn't know what to wear, but because something about this felt unnecessary. Still, she got dressed. Simple, elegant, nothing loud, nothing that asked for attention, just enough to belong in the room without trying to control it. Across the city, Blake was having a similar conversation. You're going, his business partner said firmly. Blake didn't look up from his phone. I've already made my donation. That's not the point, came the reply. Presence matters. People expect to see you. Blake exhaled slowly. Expectations again. Different setting. Same pressure. By the time both of them arrived, the event was already alive. Soft music filled the space. Voices blended together in controlled conversation. Glasses clinked lightly. Everything polished. Everything intentional, and neither of them fully comfortable in it. Kendra stood near the refreshment table, holding a drink she hadn't touched. Her eyes moved across the room, observing more than engaging. People smiled, spoke, networked. She nodded politely when needed, but she didn't force anything beyond that. Blake entered quietly. No announcement, no need. His presence carried itself. He scanned the room once, already calculating how long he planned to stay. Not long, that much was certain, and then he noticed her, not because she was trying to stand out, but because she wasn't. No performance, no overreaching conversation, just stillness in a room full of effort. He walked over, not rushed, not hesitant, just direct. Not really your scene either, huh? Kendra looked up, slightly caught off guard. Is it that obvious? Blake gave a small nod. Only to someone who's also trying to leave early. That pulled a quiet laugh from her. Unexpected, natural, and just like that, the distance between them shifted. I almost didn't come, Kendra admitted. Same, Blake replied. Then why did you? He glanced around briefly before answering. Obligation, Kendra nodded. I get that. The conversation didn't feel forced. No searching for topics, no awkward pauses. It moved easily, from surface level to something more real without effort. You seem like someone who plans everything, Blake said after a moment. Kendra raised an eyebrow. Is that a bad thing? No, he replied calmly. Just means you don't like uncertainty. She studied him briefly. And you seem like someone who doesn't mind it. Blake smirked slightly. I don't rely on it. Time passed without either of them noticing. The room thinned slowly. Conversations faded. People began leaving in clusters, but neither of them moved. Outside, rain started falling. Not heavy, just enough to change the atmosphere. Kendra glanced toward the windows. I should probably go. Blake didn't respond immediately. Neither did she move. There was a pause. Not awkward, not confusing. Just present, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. You always stick to your plans? Blake asked quietly. Kendra hesitated. Most of the time, and the other times, she didn't answer right away, because she didn't have one. The rain continued, soft, steady, unrushed, and in that moment, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. That night didn't feel reckless. It didn't feel like losing control. It felt like letting go of it, just once, without overthinking, without calculating every outcome, without holding back. And for Blake, it wasn't about expectation, or pressure, or legacy. It was just real, unplanned, unmanaged, unfiltered. No promises were made. No future was discussed. Just a moment shared between two people who, for once, didn't try to control where things were going. Morning came quietly. No sudden tension, no confusion filling the room. Just awareness. Kendra sat at the edge of the bed, her back straight, her thoughts finally catching up to her. She didn't panic. But she didn't feel settled either. What did I just do? The words stayed in her mind, not spoken out loud, but clear. Blake watched her for a moment, not intruding, not interrupting. He understood enough to know this meant more to her than it did to him in that moment. Not because he didn't care, but because she had crossed a line she had never crossed before. Kendra stood, gathering herself. No rush, no chaos, just quiet decision. That wasn't supposed to happen, she said softly. Blake's response came without hesitation. Maybe it was. She didn't argue, didn't agree. She just looked at him for a brief second, then walked away from the moment. And just like that, they returned to their separate lives. No plan to reconnect. No expectation of what came next. But what they didn't know was that this night wasn't something they would leave behind. It was something that would follow them into decisions they weren't ready for, into realities they didn't expect, into a future that had already begun. The first few days felt normal, not forced, not different. Kendra moved through her routine exactly the way she always had. Alarm, coffee, work. Even her posture stayed the same, composed, steady, controlled. If anything had changed, it hadn't reached the surface yet. At the clinic, she handled everything with her usual precision. Schedules adjusted, calls returned, problems resolved before they had the chance to grow. No hesitation, no distraction, just execution. But by the end of the week, something shifted. Not loudly, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough for her to feel it. It started with fatigue, not the kind that comes from a long day. Something deeper, heavier, like her body was asking for more rest than she was used to giving it. She brushed it off quickly. Probably just a busy week. That made sense. It fit her reality, so she accepted it. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, earlier in the day, she found herself pausing in the middle of a task, her focus slipping for a brief moment. That didn't happen. Not to her. That night, she sat on her couch longer than usual, staring at nothing in particular. Her thoughts didn't feel scattered, just delayed, like something was trying to catch her attention, and she wasn't ready to look at it yet. Then came the second sign, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Kendra stood in her bathroom, arms folded tightly across her chest as she looked at her reflection. She didn't say anything out loud, but the thought had already formed. No, it came quietly, firm, immediate. She stepped away from the mirror, shook her head once, dismissed it, because in her mind, that night didn't carry consequences. It wasn't part of her future. It was an exception, a moment, nothing more. The next morning, she reached for her phone before even getting out of bed. Not for messages, not for work, for answers. Her search history filled quickly. Can stress delay your cycle? Can your body skip a month? How late is still normal? She read through the results carefully, line by line, looking for confirmation, not truth. One article said stress could affect timing. She held on to that. Another said changes in routine could cause irregularities. She accepted that too. She exhaled slightly, lowering her phone. Okay, that makes sense. For a moment, she almost believed it. Later that afternoon, she caught herself laughing softly, not because anything was funny, but because of how far she was going to avoid one possibility. All right, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head slightly. We're not doing this. But her body wasn't asking for permission. The thought came back again that night. Stronger this time, clearer, and harder to dismiss. The next morning, she didn't search anything. She didn't overthink. She just made a decision. The store was quiet. No long lines. No distractions. She walked in, picked what she needed, and paid without hesitation. No eye contact. No second guessing. Just action. Back home, the silence felt different. Heavier. More aware. Kendra stood in her bathroom again. Same space. Different moment. The box sat on the counter. Unopened. Waiting. She didn't rush. Didn't panic. She just stared at it for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then she reached for it. Minutes passed. Slow. Measured. Every second stretching just enough to be felt. She stood still, her eyes locked on the result. Not blinking. Not moving. One line appeared. Clear. Expected. Safe. Then the second line followed. Just as clear. Just as certain. Kendra sat down immediately. Not dramatically. Just because her body needed to. Her mind didn't race. It didn't search for explanations. It didn't try to fix anything. It stopped. No. The word barely formed. This didn't fit into anything she had built. Didn't align with any decision she had made. Didn't belong anywhere in her plan. And yet, there it was. She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting against her knees. Her breathing steady, but her thoughts completely still. Because for the first time in a long time, Kendra didn't have an answer. Not for what this meant, not for what came next, not even for how to feel. Only one thing was clear. That night had followed her. The room didn't change. The walls stayed the same. The air felt the same, but Kendra didn't. She sat there for a long time after the result, not crying, not pacing, just sitting. Her hands rested on her thighs, fingers still, her gaze fixed on the floor like she was trying to hold herself in place. Pregnant. The word didn't echo. It didn't repeat. It just existed. Heavy. Final. And with it came something she couldn't organize. Not fear alone. Not confusion alone. Something deeper. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. Her thoughts moved slowly at first. Then, sharper. More direct. More specific. Blake. His name didn't come with emotion at first. Just recognition. A fact connected to a reality she couldn't separate. She stood up finally, walking toward the kitchen before stopping halfway. Her body moved. Her mind stayed behind. How do I even find him? The question came out low, almost like she didn't want to hear it fully. They hadn't exchanged much. No long conversations about the future. No plans. No expectations. Just one night and a quiet departure. She tried to recall every detail. What he said, what he didn't say. Anything that could lead her back to him. Nothing solid. Just memory. What if he doesn't remember me? That thought came next. Followed immediately by another. What if he does and doesn't care? Kendra leaned against the counter, arms crossing tightly. This was the part she couldn't prepare for. Not the pregnancy, not the reality, but the response. Because control didn't exist here. Not in his reaction. Not in what he chose to do. What if he thinks I'm lying? The question landed harder than the others. Not because she believed it, but because she knew how it could sound. She closed her eyes briefly. Not to escape, just to steady herself. Then another thought came. Clear, unavoidable. He deserves to know. That shifted everything. Not emotionally, practically. This wasn't about whether she was ready. It was about what was right. Kendra walked back into the living room, reaching for her phone. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate. She sat down, unlocking the screen. Paused, locked it again, then unlocked it once more. It wasn't fear stopping her. It was the weight of what came after. Once she said it, everything would change. She found his contact, saved without a name at first, then later updated. Simple, direct, Blake. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Still. What do I even say? She whispered it to herself, staring at the blank message field. Not too much, not too vague, not emotional, not distant. She started typing, stopped, deleted it, started again. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, she kept it simple. Hi, this is Kendra. We met at the charity event a few weeks ago. I need to talk to you. It's important. She read it twice. No extra words. No explanation. Just enough. Her chest tightened slightly. Not panic, just anticipation. Then she pressed send. The message left her screen instantly. No delay. No taking it back. Kendra placed the phone down beside her. Carefully, like it carried something fragile. At first, nothing. She stood up, walking toward the window, then back to the couch, then sitting again. Her eyes moved to the phone. Still quiet. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Her thoughts started filling the silence. Maybe the number changed. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he doesn't check messages like that. Then the sharper ones came. Maybe he saw it and ignored it. She picked up the phone, checked it. Nothing. Set it back down. Time stretched, each minute slower than the last. Her body stayed still. But inside, everything felt suspended. Then, the phone buzzed. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough. She looked at it immediately. Didn't hesitate this time. A message. From him. I remember you. Where are you? Kendra blinked once, reading it again. Short, direct, clear, no confusion. No avoidance, no delay in recognition. Her shoulders lowered slightly. Not relief, not completely, but something close to it. Because he remembered. And more than that, he responded. Kendra picked up the phone again. This time, her hands didn't hesitate. Can we meet tomorrow? She typed. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Yes, that was it. No questions. No hesitation. Kendra stared at the screen for a moment longer. Everything had just shifted again. Because now, this wasn't something she was carrying alone in silence. It was real, shared, and waiting. The cafe wasn't crowded. That was the first thing Kendra noticed when she stepped inside. No noise pushing against her thoughts. No distractions pulling her attention away. Just a low hum of conversation and the soft sound of cups meeting tables. It was calm. Too calm for what she had come to say. She chose a table near the window, not because of the view, because it gave her something to look at if she needed a second to think. Her hands rested lightly on the table. Still, but not relaxed. Every few seconds, her eyes moved toward the door, not impatient, just aware. Then he walked in. Blake. Same presence. Same steady pace. Nothing rushed. Nothing uncertain. His eyes found her immediately. No hesitation. No searching. He walked over, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down without saying anything at first. You got here early, he said. His tone was neutral. Observant. I didn't want to be late, Kendra replied. Her voice was controlled. Careful. A brief pause followed. Not awkward. Just measured. Blake leaned back slightly, studying her face. You okay? The question was simple, but it landed heavier than she expected. Kendra exhaled slowly. Not to delay. To prepare. I need to tell you something, she said. Blake didn't interrupt. Didn't rush her. He just nodded once. Go ahead. Kendra's fingers pressed lightly against each other on the table. Her eyes dropped for a second, then lifted again. I'm pregnant. The words didn't echo. They didn't hang dramatically in the air. They just settled between them. Clear. Unavoidable. Blake didn't react immediately. He didn't shift in his seat. Didn't speak. He just looked at her. Processing. Kendra held his gaze. Not challenging. Not defensive. Just steady. Seconds passed. Then more. Finally, Blake spoke. Are you sure? No accusation. No doubt in his tone. Just confirmation. Kendra nodded. Yes. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. Blake leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Still calm. Still controlled. Okay. Kendra blinked once. Her eyebrows pulled together slightly. Okay, she repeated. That's it, she added, her voice tightening just a little. Blake met her gaze directly. What do you want me to do? Panic? There was no sarcasm in it, no dismissal, just a straightforward question. Kendra leaned back slightly, studying him now. I don't know what I expected, she admitted. Probably not that, Blake said. No, she replied quietly. Silence returned. But this time, it felt different, less uncertain, more grounded. Blake sat back again, his expression thoughtful. "How far along?" he asked. "A few weeks," Kendra answered. He nodded once, taking it in, not rushing past it. "And you're sure it's mine?" The question was direct, necessary. Kendra didn't hesitate. "Yes." No explanation, no defense, just certainty. Blake held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded again. "All right." Kendra watched him closely now, trying to understand him, trying to read what wasn't being said. "You're taking this very calmly," she said. Blake exhaled slightly. "I'm thinking," he replied. "About what?" "About what this means." "And what does it mean?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, "It means this isn't something I walk away from." Kendra's expression shifted slightly, not fully softened, but changed. Blake continued. "If this is mine." He paused briefly, not because he was unsure, because he was choosing his words carefully. "Then I'm responsible." The word settled firmly between them. Kendra looked down for a second, then back up. "And if I didn't tell you?" she asked. Blake's answer came without delay. "You did." "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. "But it's what happened." Another pause. Then he added, "I'm not going anywhere." No emphasis, no dramatic delivery, just a statement. Kendra's shoulders lowered slightly, not fully relaxed, but no longer carrying the same weight as before, because this was the moment she had prepared for. Rejection, doubt, distance. And instead, she got presence. Not emotional, not overwhelming, but solid. She exhaled slowly, her fingers finally loosening against each other. "This changes everything," she said quietly. Blake nodded. "Yeah," he replied. Neither of them tried to define what everything meant. Not yet, because they both understood something important in that moment. This wasn't a conversation they could finish in one sitting, but it was a beginning. And this time, neither of them walked away. The drive out of Richmond felt longer than it actually was, not because of distance, because of what waited at the end of it. Kendra sat quietly in the passenger seat, her eyes focused ahead, though she wasn't really looking at the road. Blake drove without speaking much, not distant, just giving space. "You don't have to do this today," he said after a while. Kendra didn't turn to him. "I know." A pause. Then, "But I'd rather not delay it." Blake nodded once. No argument. The road shifted gradually. City blocks gave way to open land, buildings replaced by distance, noise replaced by stillness. And then the estate came into view. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Everything about it spoke without trying. The size, the structure, the kind of place that didn't ask for attention because it already had it. Kendra stepped out of the car slowly. Her eyes moved across the property, taking it in piece by piece. Not impressed, not intimidated, just aware. Blake walked around the front of the car. "You all right?" Kendra nodded. "Yeah," but her tone said something else. Not fear, not hesitation, just adjustment. They walked toward the entrance together, each step steady, measured. The door opened before they reached it. Inside, everything was as composed as the exterior. Clean lines, careful arrangement. Nothing out of place. Kendra stepped in, and immediately felt it. Not tension, not hostility. Observation. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was in the way eyes moved, in the brief pauses between greetings, in the way silence lasted just a second longer than normal. Blake didn't react to it. He was used to it. "Kendra," he said simply, motioning slightly forward. No long introduction, no explanation, just acknowledgement. She nodded once. "Hi." The responses came back polite, measured, controlled. No one asked questions immediately, but the questions were there, just waiting. They moved toward the dining area without much discussion. Everything felt prearranged, expected. The table was already set, every detail aligned, every seat intentional. Kendra sat when Blake did, her posture straight, her movements calm, but inside, she was aware of every glance, every pause, every shift in tone around her. Dinner began without announcement. Conversation started lightly, surface level, safe, but it didn't stay there. "So, Kendra," a voice said smoothly from across the table. Not sharp, not aggressive, just direct enough to matter. "Yes," she responded. "Tell us about yourself." Simple question, on the surface, but Kendra understood what it carried. This wasn't about where she worked, or what she did. It was about who she was, and whether that fit here. She didn't rush her answer, didn't overthink it either. "I grew up in Richmond," she said, her voice steady, even. "I've built my life around consistency and responsibility. I don't move without thinking things through. No exaggeration, no attempt to impress. Just truth." A brief pause followed, not uncomfortable, but attentive. "And what do you expect from this situation?" The same voice asked. There it was, direct, clear. Kendra met the question without shifting in her seat. "I expect honesty," she said. Another pause, and respect. Her tone didn't rise, didn't push, but it held. Across the table, Blake watched quietly, not stepping in, not redirecting, just observing. Because this wasn't something he could answer for her. The room adjusted, not dramatically, but noticeably. The energy shifted from evaluation to consideration. Blake leaned back slightly, his gaze moving briefly across the table before returning to Kendra. No words, just acknowledgement. Dinner continued. Conversation moved again, but something had already changed. Not acceptance, not rejection, recognition. Kendra sat there, composed, still aware, still adjusting, but no longer uncertain about how she would carry herself in this space. Because whatever this world expected, she wasn't here to become something else. She was here as herself, and for the first time since stepping inside, that felt enough. Dinner didn't end with tension. It ended with quiet continuation. Plates were cleared, chairs shifted slightly. Conversation moved into smaller, more controlled exchanges. Kendra remained seated for a moment after everyone else began to rise. Not because she felt out of place, because she was observing, learning the rhythm of a space that didn't reveal itself all at once. Blake stood beside her. "You handled that well," he said. Kendra glanced up at him briefly. "I answered a question. You didn't try to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to." Blake nodded once. That was exactly the point. They stepped away from the table together, moving into a wider area of the house where conversations continued in quieter tones. The atmosphere hadn't softened, but it had shifted. Earlier, she had been assessed. Now, she was being considered. A voice approached again, less formal this time, less distant. "You're very direct," it said. Kendra turned slightly. "I don't see the point in being unclear." A brief pause followed. "That can be useful," the voice replied. Not praise, but not dismissal either. Kendra gave a small nod. "Clarity saves time." The exchange ended there. Short, clean. Across the room, Blake watched, not closely enough to draw attention, but enough to notice. He saw how she carried herself. No shift in tone, no adjustment to fit the room. She didn't shrink, didn't overcompensate, didn't try to match energy that wasn't hers. And that stood out more than anything else. Kendra moved slowly through the space, not engaging in every conversation, but not avoiding them either. When spoken to, she responded. When not, she remained still. No effort to fill silence, no need to prove anything. That was new, even in this environment. Most people adjusted, adapted, shifted themselves to match expectations. She didn't, and over time, that became noticeable. The questions changed, less about her position, more about her perspective. "What do you think about long-term planning?" someone asked. Kendra didn't rush her answer. "I think it only works when the foundation is real," she said. "And what does that mean to you?" "It means you don't build something just because it looks right from the outside." A pause. It has to hold up when no one's watching. This time, the silence lingered a little longer. Not because of discomfort, because the answer landed. Blake shifted his weight slightly where he stood, his attention still on her. He wasn't surprised, but he was aware that she wasn't trying to fit into his world. She was bringing her own into it, and somehow, that carried more weight than anything else happening in the room. Later, as the conversations began to thin, Kendra stepped outside briefly. The air felt different, less structured, more open. Blake followed after a moment. "You didn't need me in there," he said. Kendra leaned lightly against the railing, looking out across the property. "I didn't expect you to speak for me. I wasn't going to." "I know." A small pause. Then she added, "I just needed to see what I was walking into." Blake stepped aside her. "And?" Kendra exhaled slowly. "It's exactly what I thought it would be." He glanced at her. "And you're still here." She looked forward. "I didn't come here to be comfortable." Blake's expression shifted slightly. "Not visibly, but enough. Most people would have adjusted," he said. "To what?" she asked. "To make it easier." Kendra shook her head once. "I'm not here to make it easier." Another pause. "I'm here because this is real." The words settled between them. Not emotional, not heavy, just honest. Blake nodded once. And in that moment, something changed again. Not in the room, not in the situation, between them. Because what started as responsibility was beginning to take shape as respect. And respect doesn't need to be forced. It builds. Slowly, steadily, exactly the way neither of them expected, but both of them were starting to understand. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where everything changed. No clear line between what they were and what they were becoming. It started with small things, practical things, doctor appointments. Kendra didn't ask Blake to come. The first time she mentioned it casually. "I have an appointment on Thursday." That was it. No invitation, no expectation. Thursday came. She walked into the clinic, checked in, and sat down. Alone, just like she had planned. Then, "Hey." Kendra looked up. Blake stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed like he hadn't made a decision to be there. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know." That was all he offered. No explanation, no speech about responsibility, just presence. Kendra studied him for a brief second before nodding once. "Okay." They sat side by side, not talking much, not needing to. Every now and then, their shoulders shifted slightly as people moved around them. The space between them small, but not uncomfortable. When her name was called, she stood. Blake followed without asking. Inside the room, everything was clinical, measured, routine. Kendra answered questions, listened carefully, nodded when necessary. Blake stayed quiet, not distant, just observing. At one point, the doctor turned slightly. "Would you like to hear the heartbeat?" Kendra paused. Not because she didn't want to, because she hadn't thought about that moment yet. She nodded slowly. "Yes." The sound filled the room. Soft, steady, undeniable. Kendra's eyes shifted slightly. Not wide, not emotional in a visible way. But something changed. Blake leaned forward just a little. Not dramatically, just enough to listen. Neither of them spoke, because in that moment, words weren't necessary. When it was over, they stepped outside together. Kendra exhaled once. Slow. "That made it real," she said. Blake glanced at her. "It already was." She shook her head slightly. "Not like that." He didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "You good?" Kendra nodded. "I am." And this time, she meant it differently. Days turned into weeks. The appointments continued, and so did Blake's presence. Not every time announced, not every time expected, but consistent. Sometimes he arrived before her, sometimes just after, but he showed up. Outside of that, they started spending more time together. Not planned, not labeled, simple things. A quiet dinner where neither of them rushed to fill silence. A drive where conversation came in pieces, not all at once. Moments that didn't demand anything. And because of that, they started to feel easier. One evening, Kendra looked over at him as they sat across from each other. "You're very calm about all of this," she said. Blake raised an eyebrow slightly. "You keep pointing that out, because most people wouldn't be. Most people don't think first." Kendra smiled faintly. "That's not an answer." Blake leaned back slightly. "I'm not confused about what this is," he said. "And what is it?" she asked. "A situation that needs to be handled properly." Kendra tilted her head slightly. "That still sounds like an answer without saying anything." Blake looked at her for a moment. Then, It's something I'm not walking away from. There it was again. Not emotional, not over-explained, just consistent. Kendra looked down briefly, then back up. You're very steady, she said. Blake shrugged slightly. I don't see the point in being anything else. A small silence followed. Then Kendra said, You know what's interesting? What? You went from someone I wasn't supposed to see again. She paused slightly. To someone I see more than anyone else. Blake smirked faintly. I move fast. That caught her off guard. She laughed. Not forced, not controlled, real. And for the first time since everything started, it didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel like a situation to manage. It felt normal, not perfect, not defined, but real in a way that didn't need explanation. Blake watched her for a moment after she laughed, not analyzing, not questioning, just noticing, because something had shifted again, not in words, not in decisions, but in comfort. And comfort was something neither of them had planned for, but both of them were starting to accept. The shift didn't announce itself. It revealed itself. At first it came in small adjustments, shorter conversations, longer pauses, a different tone in the way things were said. Kendra noticed it before anyone acknowledged it. Not directly, but through pattern. Blake's family didn't confront. They positioned. It showed in timing, in who spoke, in what was left unsaid. And, slowly, the focus changed. This wasn't just about a pregnancy anymore. It was about what came with it. One evening, Kendra sat in the same dining space she had first entered weeks ago. Nothing about the room had changed, but the energy had. Dinner was quieter, more deliberate. Blake sat beside her, not distant, but more aware. Across the table, a voice broke the silence. This situation needs to be handled properly. There was no confusion about what that meant. Kendra didn't react immediately. She continued eating, measured. Blake's expression didn't change. How do you suggest we handle it? He asked. The question wasn't defensive. It was direct. Another pause. Then, with structure, the words settled into the room. Kendra's grip on her fork tightened slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be felt. And what does that look like? Blake asked. The response came without hesitation. Clarity, commitment, stability. Each word placed carefully. Not emotional, strategic. Kendra glanced briefly at Blake, then back down at her plate. She understood exactly what was being said. This wasn't a suggestion. It was direction. Blake leaned back slightly. That's vague, he said. It doesn't have to be, came the reply. Another pause. Then, a child coming into this family requires alignment. There it was. No longer indirect. Kendra lifted her head slightly, her eyes steady. Alignment with what? She asked. The question was calm, but it carried weight. The response came just as calm. With the future. And who defines that? Kendra asked. A brief silence followed. Then, it's already been defined. That landed. Not loudly, but clearly. Blake shifted slightly in his seat. No one is making decisions for me, he said. The tone was controlled, but firmer than before. This isn't about control, the voice responded. It's about responsibility. Kendra leaned back slightly now. That sounds the same, she said. Another pause. Then, marriage provides structure. The word didn't echo, but it settled heavily. Kendra didn't look at Blake this time. She already knew what that meant. Not choice, not connection. Arrangement. Blake exhaled slowly. That's not something you decide for me, he said. It's something you should consider, came the reply. Based on what? Blake asked. Based on what this represents. Kendra's expression didn't change, but internally, something shifted. Because now, she wasn't just part of the situation. She was part of a decision being discussed. Without her, the conversation continued around her, measured, controlled, but clear. This wasn't about her as a person. It was about what she carried, and what that meant for them. Kendra sat there, listening, not interrupting, not reacting outwardly, but every word registered, every implication settled. Blake's attention moved briefly toward her. He noticed, not her posture, Not her expression, her silence. Because it wasn't passive. It was processing. And that was more important. Dinner ended without resolution. No final decision. No agreement. Just direction. Unspoken, but understood. Later, outside, the air felt different again. Not open. Not easy. Tight. Kendra stood still, her arms loosely crossed. Blake stepped beside her. "You don't have to take that seriously," he said. Kendra looked forward. "I do." A pause. "Because they do." Blake didn't respond immediately. "They don't decide anything," he said. Kendra turned slightly toward him. "Maybe not," she replied. "But they influence everything." The words sat between them, and for the first time since things started to feel easier, there was tension again, not between them, around them, and it wasn't going anywhere. The conversation didn't end that night. It followed her, not in words spoken directly to her, but in fragments, short exchanges in passing, lowered voices that stopped when she entered a room, glances that lasted just long enough to say something without saying anything at all. Kendra didn't imagine it. She recognized it. One afternoon, she stepped into the house earlier than expected. The space was quiet. Still, she paused near the hallway when she heard voices. This needs to be settled before it becomes complicated. She didn't move, didn't interrupt. Another voice responded. "It already is complicated." A brief silence. Then, not if it's handled correctly. Kendra's expression didn't change, but her body went still. "Handled? That depends on him," the second voice said. "It depends on all of us," came the reply. Kendra stepped forward then, not loudly, not abruptly, just enough for her presence to be known. The conversation stopped immediately. She didn't look toward where the voices came from. She didn't need to. She already understood. Later that evening, she stood outside again. Same space, different weight. Her hands rested against the railing. Still, but not relaxed. Blake stepped out a few minutes later. "You've been quiet," he said. Kendra didn't turn. "I've been listening." That made him pause. "To what?" She exhaled slowly. "To everything that's being said when I'm not in the room." Blake's expression shifted slightly. "You don't have to pay attention to that." Kendra turned this time, her eyes steady, focused. "I do," she said. A pause. "Because it involves me." Blake held her gaze. "They're talking about what makes sense long term," he said. "That's not what I hear," Kendra replied. "What do you hear?" She stepped closer, not aggressive, but direct. "I hear people trying to decide what I am." The words landed clean. Blake didn't interrupt. "I hear conversations about structure, about alignment, about what needs to be done." She paused slightly. "But no one is asking me anything." Her voice didn't rise, didn't break, but it carried. Blake exhaled once. "They're focused on the situation." Kendra shook her head. "That's exactly the problem." Another step forward. "I'm not a situation." Silence. Blake's jaw tightened slightly. "I know that." "Do you?" she asked. The question wasn't sharp, but it was direct enough to matter. Because right now, it feels like I walked into something where decisions are already being made. She paused. "And I'm just expected to fit into them." Blake looked at her carefully. "That's not what's happening." Kendra held his gaze. "Then what is happening?" Blake didn't answer immediately. And that said enough. Kendra stepped back slightly. "That's what I thought." Her arms crossed now. Not defensive, just contained. "I didn't come here to be managed," she continued. "I didn't come here to be placed into something that makes everything easier for everyone else." Blake took a step forward. "This isn't about making things easy." "Then what is it about?" she asked. "Responsibility." Kendra let out a short breath. "You keep saying that because it matters." "It does," she said. "But responsibility doesn't mean removing choice." That landed. Blake didn't move, didn't interrupt. Kendra's voice softened slightly. Not weaker, just clearer. "I didn't ask for this to turn into something controlled by other people's expectations. I'm already dealing with something that changed my life." Another pause. "I'm not going to lose myself in the process of making it make sense for everyone else." Silence followed. Not empty, not distant, heavy. Blake finally spoke. No one is asking you to lose yourself. Kendra looked at him. They don't have to ask, she said. Situations like this, do it quietly. Blake's expression shifted again. More serious now. That's not going to happen. Kendra studied him for a moment. You can't promise that. I can control what I allow. And what about what they allow? She asked. Blake didn't answer immediately, because he knew that part wasn't simple. Kendra stepped back fully now. Creating space. I need to be clear about something, she said. Blake waited. I'm not here because I need anything from you. Her tone remained steady. I told you because it was right. A pause. But I'm not going to stay in a space where I feel like I have to adjust who I am just to be accepted. The words settled firmly. No hesitation. No second guessing. Blake held her gaze. And for the first time since the pressure started building, he understood exactly where the line was. Not drawn loudly, but clearly. The silence didn't break immediately. Kendra's words didn't need a response right away. They had already done what they were meant to do. They drew a line. Clear. Unmistakable. Blake stood where she left him, his eyes still on her, his posture unchanged but his focus sharper. For the first time since everything began, he wasn't just managing the situation. He was thinking about what it meant beyond that. Kendra turned slightly, ready to step away, not out of anger, not out of frustration, out of clarity. I hear you. Blake's voice stopped her. She didn't turn immediately. Then slowly, she did. What does that mean? She asked. Blake stepped forward, not rushed, not uncertain. It means I understand what you're saying. Kendra studied him. That's not the same as agreeing with it. Blake nodded once. I know, but I'm not dismissing it either. Kendra held his gaze. Then what are you doing? Blake exhaled slowly. I'm figuring out where I stand in all of this. That should already be clear, she said. It was, he replied. Another pause. Now it's changing. That caught her attention. Kendra's expression didn't soften, but it shifted. How? She asked. Blake looked at her directly. At first, this was about responsibility. No hesitation, no attempt to soften the truth. I knew what needed to be handled. Kendra didn't interrupt. I wasn't confused about that, he continued. You told me, and I made a decision. A brief pause, but that's not where it is anymore. The words settled between them. Kendra's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, in focus. Then where is it? She asked. Blake didn't answer immediately. For the first time, he took a second to choose his words carefully. Somewhere I didn't plan for. That was honest. Kendra stepped slightly closer. Be specific. Blake met her halfway. I'm not here just because of the child. The statement was direct. Kendra's expression held steady. Then why are you here? She asked. Blake didn't look away. Because of you. Silence. Not long, but enough. Kendra didn't react immediately. Not because she didn't hear him. Because she needed to understand it. That's easy to say right now, she replied. It's not, Blake said. No hesitation, no defensiveness. It would be easier to keep this simple. Kendra tilted her head slightly. Simple how? Handle the situation. Keep everything structured. Do what's expected. He paused. That's what I've done my whole life. That was new. Kendra noticed it. Because this wasn't the version of Blake she had seen before. This wasn't just calm. This was open. And now? She asked. Blake exhaled once. Now I'm realizing that doesn't work here. Why not? Because this isn't just something to manage. Another step closer. And you're not something to place into a plan. Kendra held his gaze. You didn't think that before? Blake shook his head slightly. I didn't think about it at all. That honesty landed stronger than anything else he had said. Kendra's posture shifted just slightly. Not fully relaxed, but less guarded. I'm not asking you to change everything overnight, she said. I'm not asking you to force anything. Blake nodded. I know. Then what are you saying? Blake paused again. Then, I'm saying I'm choosing to be here, not because I have to, because I want to. The difference sat between them. Clear. Kendra looked at him for a moment longer. You're sure about that? Blake didn't hesitate. Yes. Then he added, I stayed at first, because it was the right thing to do. His voice didn't shift, didn't soften. But I'm still here now for a different reason. Kendra's eyes searched his face. And that is, Blake stepped just close enough for the space between them to feel intentional. You, no build-up, no over-explanation, just truth. Kendra exhaled slowly, not overwhelmed, not swept into anything, just processing. Because this wasn't pressure, this wasn't expectation, this was choice. And choice was something she understood. I'm not going to compete with expectations, she said quietly. You don't have to. I'm not going to force something just because of circumstances. I'm not asking you to. Then what happens now? She asked. Blake looked at her. We take it one step at a time. Not rushed. Not forced. Without anyone else deciding it for us. Kendra held his gaze. Measuring. Then slowly. She nodded. Not agreement to everything, but acceptance of what this moment was. Real. Not perfect. Not defined. But no longer uncertain. Because for the first time, this wasn't about pressure. It wasn't about obligation. It wasn't about fitting into something already decided. It was about two people, choosing to figure it out. Together. The first time Blake stepped into Kendra's side of Richmond, he didn't say much. Not because he didn't notice. Because he noticed everything. The streets felt different from the land he was used to. Closer. More connected. Voices carried from one house to the next. Music played somewhere in the distance, not loud, but present enough to be part of the atmosphere. People didn't move past each other quietly. They acknowledged, looked, spoke. Blake walked beside Kendra, his pace matching hers without needing to adjust. You're quiet, Kendra said. I'm paying attention, he replied. To what? Everything. Kendra glanced at him briefly. What do you think so far? Blake looked ahead. It feels different. She smiled slightly. That's one way to say it. They passed a group gathered outside, conversation flowing easily. Laughter came without hesitation. No one held back. Blake noticed the difference immediately. No filtering, no measuring every word, just presence. You grew up here? He asked. Yeah, Kendra replied. Same streets, same people, same energy. Blake nodded once. It shows. Kendra raised an eyebrow slightly. How? You don't hold back who you are, he said. She looked forward again. I was never taught to. A brief pause. That's not something you see everywhere, Blake added. Kendra glanced at him again. You mean where you're from? Blake didn't avoid it. Yeah. They continued walking. A voice called out from across the street. Kendra. She turned slightly, lifting her hand in acknowledgement. Hey. No hesitation, no pause, just recognition. Blake watched the exchange. No introduction needed, no explanation. She belonged here. Not by effort, by history. You don't get that where I am, Blake said. What? She asked. That kind of connection. Kendra shrugged lightly. It's not always perfect. I didn't say it was. Another pause. But it's real. She nodded. That's the point. They reached a small open space where people gathered casually, conversations overlapping without structure. Blake slowed slightly, taking it in. You all right? Kendra asked. Yeah. You look like you're thinking too much. Blake smirked faintly. I'm trying not to. That made her laugh. Good luck with that. He glanced at her. I'm serious. I know, she said. And you don't do that. Do what? Overthink everything. Kendra tilted her head slightly. I think enough. Not the same way, Blake replied. She looked at him carefully. And how do you think? Blake took a second. I measure things. Kendra nodded. That sounds exhausting. It's efficient. She shook her head slightly. Not everything needs to be efficient. Blake looked around again. Here, nothing felt calculated. And somehow, it worked. I see that, he said. They stood there for a moment longer, not talking, not needing to. Blake's posture shifted slightly, less guarded, less analytical. Kendra noticed. You're adjusting, she said. I'm learning, he corrected. A small pause. Then, this is your world. Kendra nodded. And you're in it. Blake looked at her. Yeah, no hesitation. And you didn't change anything for me, he added. Kendra held his gaze. I wasn't going to. Blake nodded once. Good. Then he said something that carried more weight than anything else he had expressed so far. This matters. Kendra didn't ask what he meant. She understood. Because this wasn't about where they came from. It was about what they were willing to understand, and for the first time, both of their worlds existed in the same space, without one replacing the other, without one being reduced, just present, and that presence was enough to start building something that didn't erase either of them. The hospital room felt smaller than it actually was, not because of the space, because of what it held. Kendra's grip tightened slightly against the edge of the bed, her breathing controlled but heavier than before. This wasn't unfamiliar territory. She had been here for appointments, checkups, conversations, but this was different. There was no more waiting, no more preparation, no more time to think ahead. Everything had led to this moment. Blake stood a few steps away at first, not distant, just giving her space the way he always had. His eyes stayed on her, focused, present. You okay? He asked. Kendra exhaled slowly, her head tilting back slightly before she looked at him again. I don't think okay applies right now, she said. Blake nodded once. Fair. A brief pause. Then he stepped closer. Not because she asked, because it felt right. Kendra didn't tell him to stop, so he stayed. Time moved differently in the room. Slower, more deliberate. Each moment stretched just enough to be felt. Kendra's focus shifted inward. Not distracted, not uncertain, just locked in, and Blake stayed beside her through it, not talking too much, not filling silence unnecessarily. Just there. Every now and then, Kendra's hand reached out slightly, not fully, not intentionally, and each time, Blake met it, no hesitation. At one point she looked at him directly. This wasn't supposed to be my life, she said quietly. The words weren't dramatic. They were real. Blake didn't interrupt. He understood what she meant. Not just the moment, everything that led to it. I know, he replied. Kendra's eyes held his for a second longer. Then she added, I didn't plan for any of this. Blake nodded. Neither did I. A pause. But we're here. That landed. Not as comfort, as truth. The room shifted again as the moment approached. More movement, more direction. But through it all, nothing pulled them out of what they were in. Then, it happened. The sound filled the room, sharp, clear, alive. Kendra's body stilled for a second. Her eyes shifted immediately. And just like that, everything else disappeared. The weight, the questions, the pressure, gone. Blake looked at her first, not the child, because in that moment, he needed to see her reaction. Kendra's expression changed in a way that couldn't be explained. Not overwhelming, not dramatic, just certain. She held the child close, her arms steady despite everything her body had just gone through. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then, quietly, this changes everything. Blake stepped closer now, standing beside her fully. Yeah, he said, but this time, it meant something different. A doctor's voice cut through gently. The father needs to sign the documents. The words echoed the beginning of something they had already lived. Kendra looked down briefly, then back at Blake. Their eyes met. You said you didn't want anything from me, Blake said, not as a question, as a memory. Kendra adjusted her hold slightly. I didn't, she replied softly. A pause. Then she looked at the child. Until it stopped being just about me. Silence followed, not empty, not uncertain, complete. Blake nodded once. No hesitation, no delay. He stepped forward, not because he had to, because he chose to. The pen moved across the paper, simple, final. And in that moment, everything connected. Not perfectly, not without everything they had been through, but honestly. Kendra leaned back slightly, her eyes still on the child. Blake stood beside her. Not ahead, not behind, beside. And for the first time since that night that brought them here, nothing felt out of place. Not the moment, not the outcome, not even the life they hadn't planned. Because now, it wasn't something they were reacting to. It was something they were stepping into, together. Life didn't settle into a perfect rhythm overnight. There were still adjustments, still moments where things didn't align easily, still conversations that took time instead of quick answers. But nothing felt forced, and that made the difference. Kendra didn't wake up one day and suddenly become part of Blake's world. She didn't shift her identity to fit expectations. She didn't reshape herself to make things smoother, and Blake didn't ask her to. What they built came from what they chose, day by day. Some mornings were quiet. Kendra moved through her routine again, but this time it wasn't about holding everything in place. It was about moving with what was already there. Blake adjusted too, not in dramatic ways, not in ways that called attention, but in presence. He showed up, consistently, not because he was proving anything, but because it became natural. There were no rushed decisions about marriage, no pressure to define everything immediately, no attempt to label what they hadn't fully lived yet. Instead, they allowed it to grow through shared responsibility, through time, through understanding what each of them needed without losing themselves in the process. One evening, they sat outside together, not speaking much, just existing in the same space. Kendra looked over at him. "You know what's different now?" she asked. Blake glanced at her. "What?" "I'm not trying to figure everything out anymore." Blake nodded slightly. "That's progress." She smiled faintly. "It's not about control anymore." Blake didn't respond right away, because he understood what she meant. Not as something she was letting go of completely, but as something she no longer relied on to feel secure. "And you?" she asked. Blake leaned back slightly. "I'm not measuring everything the same way." Kendra raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a big shift for you." "It is, but it's necessary." Kendra studied him for a moment. "You didn't expect any of this, did you?" Blake shook his head once. "No. Do you regret it?" she asked. The question wasn't heavy. It was honest. Blake didn't hesitate. "No." Kendra held his gaze. "Not even the part where everything changed?" Blake looked at her carefully. "That's exactly the part I don't regret." A small silence followed. Not uncertain, not unresolved, just understood. Kendra leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been before. "Life didn't go the way I planned," she said. Blake glanced at her. "And?" Kendra smiled. "It turned out better than I expected." Blake didn't respond with words this time. He didn't need to, because everything they had built was already speaking for itself. Not perfect, not defined by expectations, but real. And that was enough. The nights that followed felt different too, not because everything was figured out, but because they were no longer questioning whether they should be there. They had chosen it, not once, but continuously, and that made it stronger than anything forced into place. Kendra looked out ahead, her voice quieter now. "Sometimes," she paused, "the life you plan isn't the one you're meant to live." Blake nodded slightly. "And sometimes," he added, "the one you didn't plan turns out to be the right one." Kendra glanced at him. "Yeah." A brief pause. "Then, I believe that now." Silence followed. Not empty, complete, because this wasn't about how things started. It was about how they chose to continue. And that choice made all the difference. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think, reflect, or even see something differently, take a moment to like this video. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Where are you watching from? What part of this story stayed with you? And if you want more stories like this, stories that don't just entertain, but stay with you, go ahead and subscribe, because here, we don't just tell stories, we tell the ones that mean something.